countdown. All right, we're recording, broadcasting in 5, 4, 3, 2.
NACAC, North American Council on Adoptable Children. Please comment in chat.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is brought to you by Child Welfare Information Gateway, the information dissemination service for the Children's Bureau, Administration for Children and Families, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. My name is Elizabeth Kramer, and I am the Senior Manager for Knowledge Transfer and Information Management at Child Welfare Information Gateway. This webinar is one of several that we are offering virtually to help ensure that critical information is shared with child welfare and related professionals, foster families, adoptive families, and adopted persons during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we are prevented from gathering in person and challenged to continue to work with children and families in new and innovative ways. Today's presentation was originally scheduled as a breakout session for the National Foster Parent Association Annual Conference. Just a few housekeeping notes. We are recording today's webinar and we'll be making this recording available on our website at www.childwelfare.gov. It also will be made available on the National Foster Parent Association website. All of our participant phone lines are muted at this time, and we ask that you submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. At the end of the webinar, you also will receive a link to a short survey. We ask that you please provide us with your feedback on this webinar. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our session today, Parents as Changemakers, Effective Policy Advocacy. Our speaker today is Marissa Sanders. Marissa is a consultant to the North American Council on Adoptable Children and is the director of the West Virginia Foster Adoptive Kinship Parents Network. So Marissa, now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Marissa appears in the upper right corner of the screen.
I'm so excited to be here and to share with you all about advocacy and in particular policy advocacy. As Elizabeth mentioned, I am a consultant with the North American Council on Adoptable Children. I'm also a state partner for CHAMPS, which you'll hear about in a minute, Children Need Amazing Parents, and the director of our state foster parent association, which is the Foster Adoptive and Kinship Parents Network. Before I started the network here, which was just a couple years, not even quite 2 years ago, I worked in disability rights for 20 years and did a whole lot of advocacy at the local, regional, state, and federal levels. So I have a lot of background working in especially policy advocacy, and I'm excited to share some strategies and ideas and hear kind of what you all are hoping to learn or gain. So as you can see on this first slide, if you can comment in the Q&A where you either currently are doing or hope to do the most advocacy. So if you're looking at the legislature or a child welfare agency, or maybe even it could be the national level, or if you're looking more at individual cases, it's helpful for me to know and where everybody's coming from, and then also something that you're hoping to learn today. And I don't know if I will be able to see those answers, or Elizabeth will tell me. I'm really excited to be here. And CHAMPS, again, stands for Children Need Amazing Parents. It's a national campaign to ensure bright futures for kids in foster care by promoting the highest quality parenting. The goal of CHAMPS is to spur some policy reforms around child welfare and foster care in 20 to 25 states over 5 years by prioritizing quality foster parenting and ensuring that foster parents are equipped with training and support to help children heal, grow, and flourish. So one of the ways that they do that is by partnering with several state organizations, including mine in West Virginia and some other states, and then also by working with several national partners, which includes the North American Council on Adoptable Children and several others, including the National Foster Parent Association.
A graphic spelling out 6 policy priorities.
So Marissa, we do have some comments about what people are hoping to learn. We've got someone who'd like to help advocate for birth parents working towards reunification. Someone that is hoping to streamline the ICPC process, noting that invisible borders between states sometimes create unnecessary delays and compel caseworkers to place children much further away from home communities than necessary. We've got someone here from a child welfare agency that hopes to learn different ways to communicate with foster parents. We've got somebody here from the great state of South Carolina, and somebody mentioning that they would like to advocate, or they envision themselves advocating primarily at the agency level as well as in individual cases.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure.
So a little more background on CHAMPS. There are 6 policy priorities that CHAMPS is really working towards. The first is supporting relationships between birth and foster families. Second one is implementing data-driven recruitment and retention practices. So really looking at how can we use data and even gather more data so that we can effectively